Now it's a time of changes. Now is the time to move on. This is the time for solutions. Feel the motion. Be new is born. Me and me, none of you. Now I'm connected to you. Me and me, none of you. Me and you will do it for you. This is the time for solutions. Be new is for you.
Buenas tardes. Llegamos al Ecuador de la última jornada de este BNew Logistics desde la antigua fábrica Estrella Damm. Lo hacemos gracias a nuestros sponsors principales, Servihabitat, el servicer líder en la gestión de activos financieros e inmobiliarios, l'Ajuntament de Barcelona, el Ministerio de Transportes, Movilidad y Agenda Urbana y Akbar, empresa de gestión del ciclo integral del agua con más de 150 años de historia, y también al Port de Barcelona, con el que hemos conversado en concreto ayer. Bien, nosotros seguimos impulsando esta nueva economía en este formato híbrido. Recordad, tenéis el B-Village, también podéis hacer networking, conectar con empresas, con nuevas startups. Contamos con más de 50 de ellas a través de nuestra web BNew. Hemos hablado de Barcelona, hemos hablado del área metropolitana, de la importancia, la incidencia de estas ciudades gigantes, y ahora damos un salto y conectaremos directamente vía online con África, porque es muy importante poner el acento en este continente en permanente desarrollo. Hace falta muchas mejoras que seguro que se pondrán encima de la mesa, pero un dato rápido sobre la importancia de este continente, ¿no? Por ejemplo, tenemos que en los últimos 16 años se ha invertido, en la inversión mayoritaria ha sido en logística, y se ha multiplicado por 3 en el área, sobre todo subsahariana, y con un hub permanente en el puerto de Tánger. Bien, este formato, como decía, es online y también en inglés, así que vamos a saludar. We read via online. Dr. Ali Is. Hello, Dr. Ali Is.
Hello,
Nice
it's
to
Ala,
meet you.
but anyway.
Yes, he's the first Under-Secretary of State and Secretary-General of the Federation of Egyptian Chambers of Commerce, the Union of African Chambers, the Confederation of Egyptian European Business Associations, and the Vice President of the Asociación Mediterránea del Medio Ambiente. Awesome, Doctor, your curriculum. Well, hello everyone, and thanks you all for your participation. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
So the pleasure is mine, and I look forward to having an interactive, wonderful session. Welcome to the Barcelona New Economic Week Logistics session, the future of logistics in Africa. And we are honored to have with us two very prominent speakers. One of them is backed by an MBA and MA from no less than the Universities of Pennsylvania and Georgetown, where she teaches, besides being a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council Africa Center and a term member of the Council on Foreign Relations and a young leader at the Milken Institute, a regular writer on African issues in leading publications and co-author of the award-winning The Next Africa book. But she walks the talk, bringing over $2 billion of FDI flows into 30 African countries. And over almost 2 decades, she has been advising investors, investing in startups, besides sitting on the board of Invest in Africa USA. Aubrey Herbie, our distinguished speaker. Welcome on board. And we have our other speaker, an African, Mediterranean, Spanish logistics expert from Algeria, backed by postgraduate studies from the University of Science and Technology of Ouari Boumediene, with over 2 decades of experience from custom brokerage to international forwarding, shipping, industrial projects, door-to-door, and the list goes on. Today, from Spain, she manages in Siva Logistics, and she's heading the African continent business development. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, on board. And let's start with my dear friend Naima. Is the African logistics at present sufficient for the needs of today and the needs of the future? Will the rate of its development and modernization be significant? What is the true way forward?
Thank you. Well, first, I'm very delighted to be participating live in the session and be new session today from Barcelona. So Africa is a key topic for everyone. It's a faster growing market. The World International Monetary Fund is projecting 3.4 growth for 2021. In 2050, it will be over than 2 millions of people and will be created around 20 million of jobs. We have an historical presence in Africa throughout our sea activity, launched in 1990. We implemented, I will tell you a story, our story, okay? So we implemented our logistic activity in South Africa and Angola in 2006 with 4 offices and 4 border offices. But since 2020, we are tripling 5 times our growth there with the mission to be a leading freight management company in 2025. So today we are properly present in the 7 business ranges driven by 7 corridors, present in 42 countries all over Africa. We cover all the African continent with smart logistical solution. We are moving 1.3 billions of tons all over Africa, most of them carried by sea. So we have a direct presence at the 8 major air hubs. So we move daily air cargo. We have also 215,000 4PL warehouses across 38 locations in Africa with dedicated trucks. Last year, we performed around 95,000 custom clearance. Then, I may say, in regard to the way to forward, the direct foreign investment is the solution, is interesting because it brings huge modern technology that will encourage local community to participate and grow up by creating competitivity. It also creates new opportunities of jobs. So we are a big player in marketplace. We connect suppliers and customers all over the world through the platform MySiva.
Thank you, Naima. Maybe
You're welcome.
I'll move to Aubrey. Naima mentioned investments. Is there enough money allocated for logistics, especially by development banks like African Development Bank, IFC, European Investment Bank, and the list goes on? Aubrey, what's your take on that?
Well, there are huge gaps in infrastructure in African markets, and we continue to see a large financing gap. And depends on what you put in that bucket, but it can range anywhere from about 40 billion to 100 billion annually. That's the gap that needs to be filled for infrastructure. And because logistics in part is dependent on infrastructure, I think that the data show that there is indeed a significant gap and lack of financing. And then this brings us always to the question of the bankability problem, which is, is there money sitting and waiting for deals that are not yet done because they're either very complex from a, cross-border political risk perspective, or they are greenfield and require a lot of project development work. So there is a gap. The question, though, is the problem with investment due to the gap in financing, or is it due to lack of bankable projects? I think many would say that there is more money out there right now sitting and waiting to invest in infrastructure writ large than there are bankable projects. And that's the kind of problem that is put to us as those investing in the Africa's economic and social development. And so there is a gap, and there are many entities that are trying to solve that gap. So, for example, I think of Africa 50, which is based in Casablanca. It's $1 billion fund that has financing from African governments and other development banks. And they've dedicated a large part of their resources to project development, actually putting money to creating bankable projects. Similarly, and AIF comes out of the African Development Bank. So it really is part of the African DFI community. So I think within global DFI, there's not necessarily the appetite to invest enough in project development, but within African DFIs, including AFDB and Africa 50, also the Africa Finance Corporation in Nigeria, there is appetite. And for those who are listening, I think one interesting project to look into where DFIs have invested in logistics is the Arise project in Gabon. It is a logistics hub and industrial park that's adding value to Gabonese timber industry. And AFC out of Nigeria invested in that.
Thank you, Aubrey. So we can take from here that there is a huge need not for loans, not for investment finance, but more for technical assistance to switch ideas and projects to bankable projects. And this we can go back from here to our friends and different donors and development banks and funds that they should allocate more funds for that. Do you agree to that?
Yeah, I think it's allocating more funds, but it's also putting them at what funds those categories are in, right? So again, I think there needs to be a lot of work on the project development side, and there's still gaps in financing the long development phase of particular infrastructure projects. However, in logistics, not all logistics these days is asset heavy, right? There are asset light solutions that are coming up from the innovation space and the tech ecosystems in African markets. So I think a lot of those are finding financing.
I'll come back to this later. Now I move to you, Naima. The few success stories we've seen all around Africa basically was in the port sector. This was the most biggest successes, and they were based on various modalities of public-private partnership. Are the present legislations or regulations moving in that direction throughout Africa, or just where we witness hub ports like South Africa, like some countries in West Africa, like Kenya, like Egypt, and so forth? Are governments moving from being the inefficient, slow-paced operator to the highly needed regulator enabling private sector to do its role? What's your take on that?
Yeah. So I think that government are moving from being the inefficient operator. So we have, you told about cases of ports. There are many cases of public-private partnerships, success stories, like the Djibouti port and Tanger port. It's thanks to the government decision that opened the opportunity of growth that converted the port to a strategic ones. But by the way, it opens also the door by giving more opportunities to the private companies. For about our stories, SEVA acquired local companies in Eastern and Southern Africa, AMI Worldwide and Manica, that bought us 100 years of expertise in the region. It owns also a minority share of MACFA that were established in 1994 in Ethiopia and Mauritania. It provides us a full range of logistics services to meet the rapid growth of the retail and consumer goods markets. So we have more and more stories about that with EBA freight forwarder partnership with in Egypt, and in Morocco we completed the takeover of ASTI. Then we can offer to our customers our full range of tailored innovation solution along with our recognized expertise and our operational excellence. In so doing, we aim to become leading continent-wide market player. So I think that the government give this opportunity for the public-private partnership, but in the same time, it facilitates also the innovation for private and foreign companies.
Thanks, Naima. Aubrey, one issue that maybe You're based in the States where you have in NAFTA around 60% trade intercontinental, so within the FTA. European Union is the same, Asian is the same. We in Africa, unfortunately, we have only 13%. And with all the fights we're doing, trying to create the continental free trade agreement, even within the historical small parts like the SADC, like the ECA, like COMESA, we have even less than the 13% intercontinental trade. So it's the chicken and the egg. Do we need to have upgraded transport and logistics to be able to do inter-African trade? Or it's the opposite, that we need to have a continental free trade agreement to attract and create the appetite for investments in transport and logistics?
Well, thankfully, I don't think we have to choose. We can have them both at the same time. We already have the AFCFTA, which came into force last year. And, that continental framework is very essential for driving the progress forward on economic integration. However, there's a difference between what's on the books and what's on the street. And so implementation is key for that. And it'll take, it's a generational project, similar that we saw in the European Union. But you have to have the investments in infrastructure as well, because, one of the statistics that always kind of blows my mind is less than 3% of the world live in small landlocked countries. 30% of Africans live in small landlocked countries. And so as a result of the challenges coming out of colonialism and the way borders were drawn and the number of countries in the region being 54, there's a natural fragmentation that defines African markets that needs to be overcome. And that fragmentation means normally a high cost of doing business, a high cost of logistics, moving in products. So you always hear those very, very stark statistics about how it's more expensive to move a container, say, from Durban to Goma than it is to move a container from Shanghai to Baltimore, or Baltimore all the way to Dubai. So, the cost of logistics are high. Additionally, most products are moved by truck in the region rather than rail, which adds high costs. So we need those investments to come alongside the framework of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. I think implementation will be, there'll be some places that implement faster, so it'll be uneven. And I think, for example, the East African Community, EAC, the 5 countries of the EAC, particularly 3 countries of Uganda, Rwanda, and Kenya, have moved quicker on a lot of the integration around the rail lines, around the Mombasa corridor, because they're so dependent on the port of Mombasa. And so I think they'll move more quickly when it comes to certain aspects of integration. And the goal, of course, is free movement of people, free movement of capital, and free movement of goods. And that will grow. I think there are some structural differences that prevent the percentage of regional trade to be very high at this moment, which is, for example, there's, when you look at NAFTA, the US and Mexico have quite diversified economies. There's a lot of things to trade back and forth between them. Many economies in African markets, their neighbors have similar products and similar production. So it's not that, Uganda is going to sell coffee to Kenya because Kenya has coffee, and so this issue of structural diversification is key. And when you see the more diversified markets, they do trade more with each other. So if you do look at Kenya and Uganda and Rwanda, because they're more diversified than, say, in Nigeria or in Angola, they have a higher percentage of interregional trade, because they have different products to trade with each other. So there's a structural impediment and there's an infrastructure impediment to Pan-African trade.
Thanks, Aubrey. I can't object what you said. In Egypt, for example, to ship from inland Egypt to the nearest port costs more than shipping from that port to Shanghai. So it applies all over Africa, unfortunately. And this diversification of industrial bases within Africa, we're working actually on a survey to promote what we call third country cooperation. We're attracting manufacturers that their product is either freight sensitive or tariff sensitive to utilize the existing industrial bases. We're not talking new investment, no greenfield investment. We're talking about the existing infrastructure. Instead of working one shift, work two shifts, three shifts to manufacture what is not available in neighboring countries in Africa. And this is a fast track of actually promoting inter-African trade one way or another. And mentioning this, I'll come to you back, Naima, on the inland part. Like rightfully said by Aubrey, that the inland component of Africa is huge. The potential actually of doing business with it is bigger. It is non-economic to use the very obsolete land transport facilities that exist or use air freight to do business with these countries. So the landlocked African countries require multi-modular transport. What's your take on this potential of multimodal transport, whether we're talking roads, railways, river transport, which is highly economic and has been practical historically and then it stopped? Is it developing at the same rate as we've witnessed in the major hub ports? And are smaller ports, which is very important, developing at the same rate or not?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's now it's going on the way to develop the ports and the infrastructure there. In a certain way, all is linked in Africa. All is about challenging. Africa has an entrepreneurial and innovative spirit, but also has social, economic, and inequalities problem. In my point of view, the first key challenge is the short sea shipping that can bring quick solution and more investment on the development, of course, of infrastructures, ports, and corridors. Um, Now it exists about 7 corridors there. And we can talk about the high education for the young that represent plus than 50% of the population. The culture background, the digitalization will highly contribute to the growth. Africa is a big challenge in the way of customs clearance, the high level of rates for transportation. But we can also talk about the digital savvy and renewed for tech adoption, with a boom in usage of mobile phones increased in middle class. So in 2040, this number could increase to 900 million people. And Africa is growing also about developing the renewable energy sources. So it's a big challenge, and all will be increased, and all is the investment have to follow with local private companies, foreign, and the government have to facilitate all these investments.
Thanks, Naima. Aubrey, we hear about success stories in our neighbor, the European Union, where they had this Motorways of the Sea initiative moving land transport into short sea shipping, where they have the Rail to Sea initiative, and the list goes on. We in Africa, we've been having dreams. We've been having dreams of super highways connecting Africa longitudinally, horizontally. So we're talking about Alexandria, Cape Town, which is almost concluded, but with teeny-weeny gaps every now and then. We're hearing about corridors like Port Said, Dakar on the North Rim on the Mediterranean, Safaga N'Djamena linking with the N'Djamena Dakar corridor, and so on. This is augmented by also an upgrading of railways. We see new lines being established, like the one linking Addis Ababa to the sea, so it's no longer a landlocked country in practice, and so forth. How do you see, from a political perspective, the potential of getting all these teeny-weeny bits that's blocking dreams, blocking super corridors? You think the political will of a unified Africa will be stronger than the political problems in the bottlenecks that we're witnessing at the moment?
Again, I think it's difficult to talk about Africa as a continent in this context. I do think there will be progress in sub-regions where countries are working together and where local financing, whether they be sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, and then the Pan-African kind of DFIs, can come in and manage the cross-border risk better than outside investors who see the challenge of cross-border risk, upping the political risk challenges, et cetera. And I'm reminded again of BNSF, an American rail company that looked years ago, over a decade ago, at a rail in East Africa that would connect Mombasa better to Kigali and to Kampala. And one of the challenges they couldn't get over was the multi-country cross-border risk. But then you have the countries working with the Chinese, and I think the Chinese are an important element in this conversation about infrastructure because the China finances more infrastructure than all DFIs and foreign capital combined. And so they finance that infrastructure. Of course, there's problems, and we could get deeply into the question around debt and whether the debt's being used wisely and the rate and the cost. But what has happened is, there are rail projects moving forward, standard gauge rail projects across East Africa, in part because of coordination between the countries and them working with the Chinese. So I do think that there is some appetite externally from China, and then internally in terms of local capital sources for regional cross-border infrastructure.
You're totally right in that. Egypt was the second country in the world to have a railway after the UK, even before US, but seems to be it was forgotten to maintain and upgrade it over a century. So it ended up that it was no longer useful as even for human beings, not to mention using it for transport. And very recently, just a few weeks ago, the government has decided to open the door to the private sector, and now we're having bullet trains not only for human beings but for cargo. So here we see that the public-private partnership, I think, is the only way forward in that direction. Governments should remove their hands from controlling what they could not deliver, which is transport and logistics, and leave it to the private sector to run on board. Coming to you, Naima, being the person with hands on in the field. Let's assume that we have an ongoing free trade agreement. Let's assume that logistics have been upgraded and transport has been modernized, but the non-tariff barriers that we find at the crossing that were mentioned by Aubrey just a minute ago, that we have between countries, between borders, the human resources, are they qualified or not? And more important, are these issues being tackled or not?
Yeah. The non-tariff barriers to trade is the push. Helps so much for the trade between countries. But as I said before, it's not the only thing. The first key challenge is in investing in another things that as the short sea shipping to make more investment on the development of infrastructures, ports and corridors that are not enough today because Africa is a big challenge, is growing so fast, faster than we can imagine. Also, Africa, we have to explore to the forces of this country because since the COVID pandemic, Africa growth in mobile commerce and mobile payment, this has created an increase in e-commerce and retail. It also promising continent for retailers with a middle class that is growing. So Africa is a boom and is now in boom and very challenging. I can say also something about the last questions that in some areas road infrastructures is a challenge. On a positive note, several new rail services have started in the past few months before. Then within Southern Africa region to landlocked Zimbabwe and Zambia, these challenges do also create opportunities by developing partnership with local suppliers that are very capable of adapting to local conditions and do already have proven solution. Through knowledge and sharing, we develop even better ways of getting things done. By doing so, we become locally relevant solution driving and deliver reliable transportation that customer can trust.
Okay, this brings me to one important element. COVID era, with all its problems, had a major global side. The booming fintech that is created by youth, in most cases, and has managed to support tremendously doing business, continuing business, and even starting new businesses. What about logistics in Africa? And where is Africa going in that direction? And how is our fintech, African fintech, moving in that direction? Aubrey, the floor is yours.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I think there's a lot of very exciting activity in the African venture ecosystem writ large, right? You're seeing the emergence of unicorns in the fintech space, and and then also Andela became one last week in the kind of education and technology skills outsourcing space. And you also that is mimicked in the infrastructure arena. And you have a lot of investment flowing to asset light platforms that are going to make last mile delivery cheaper, and then also transport, individual transport. And then you have the trucking space. So I would say that there have been kind of three categories of company that have received venture investment over the past 5-6 years. One category is around last mile delivery. So a lot of this had to do with the motorcycle transport in African cities. And so you saw that with Cindy, with early days of Max.ng. And then a lot of those guys kind of bled over into individual transport. So Max became more focused on individual transport when it comes to motorcycle taxis. And you saw that from Max, Gozem, Boda Boda. You saw that with players like Ambistamp, which was doing electric motorbikes in Rwanda. They all raised significant rounds over the last few years. Then there's this kind of third category of platforms, and this is where the Uber for trucking plays come in. You've seen that with Trella, you have seen that with Lori, with Kobo 360, all trying to address the issues of inefficient transport and allocation of movement of goods. Again and again, as you know, like the percentage of trucks in the United States that come back empty, meaning go one thing and then come back empty, is less than 3%. But the percentage of trucks that came back empty in Nigeria is something like 70, 80%. So these platforms are solving that by better matching supply and demand of those logistics services, and allowing small players, you own 2-3 trucks, to service big clients, whether those be a Flour Mills Nigeria, Nestle, a Coca-Cola bottler, etc. So I think we'll continue to see the growth in some consolidation in those platform plays for last mile delivery and for trucking in the region.
Aubrey, I'm so happy that you mentioned Trella, because Trella was a little cute boy who came to me to apply to one of our regional European Union projects where we have an incubator, and it's his enthusiasm is what really made us select him for providing the support. And today it's growing regionally. I think they IPO'd for 400 million, and that's just a starting point for, I think he was a 19 years old student. So that's
no, I mean, this Cairo, Lagos, both cities, 20 million people, cities full of entrepreneurial drive, the hustling mentality. You have Halan there as well, doing the kind of ride hailing. And really you saw Uber, the actual Uber and Bolt, lose market share in a lot of these markets because they were competing pretty heavily with local players, and realizing that motorcycle transport would be more efficient in a lot of large cities than actual cars. But you also see players coming in trying to coordinate corporate travel. So you see that a lot in Southern Africa. So a better use of corporate cars. You see better, like trying to do where's my transport, raised money out of South Africa, being able to better help individuals identify where they could most efficiently access different transport routes, and where buses could maximize and make efficient their routes. So it's taking a lot of the technology that's been embedded in logistics providers in the US. I mean, it's famous when you hear about things like UPS or FedEx, maximizing their routes so they only take right turns versus left turns in the United States, things of that sort, being applied to a consumer base in African markets that have spent years and years and years doing inefficient commuting. And the amount of productivity that is lost in African markets for sitting in traffic is incredible.
Maybe I'll come back to you on something relevant. In Egypt, for example, we're 100 million, plus or minus. 70% are under the age of 29. You see this new booming African generation, these youngsters, would their modus operandi, their way of doing business, change the whole landscape of transport and logistics in the country, especially when we see that delivery, for example, is one of the key games going all around the region for the past decade. So is this the way forward?
I think that there's a mix, right? There's not one way forward. The development trajectory of African countries require all ways forward. And the imperative, I mean, Egypt is even a little bit older than some of the other markets, right? But you're still struggling with an incredibly large and fast-growing youth population. So you have to have investments in physical logistics and physical asset-heavy traditional infrastructure in order to reduce the cost. But at the same time, there's a lot of inefficiencies going on in the system today. The system as it is today, and wasting time in traffic. And we've all kind of seen that in the COVID world, where a lot of people were not commuting anymore, and they saw how much productivity they got out of not commuting. And so you'll have the entrepreneurial kind of asset light technology overlay, but you need both, because ports still need to be more efficient as they operate, while you need more efficiency in the actual distribution of existing logistics resources.
This brings me to Naima. The famous triangle is moving goods, the infrastructure of transport and logistics, and moving money. How do you see the financial system in Africa, and is it conducive to doing business as well as doing overseas business, as well as supporting transport and logistics?
The financial system in Africa is, I can see that is a little bit complicated depending on which country. We are talking about Africa that is huge, okay? So I think that each country in Africa has its particularities. but generally we can say that the financial system of payment existing now is not helping so much. It has to be improved to facilitate the trade commerce between Africa and the rest of the world.
Aubrey, we've been hearing about green mobility, the Green Deal, even the European External Investment Plan is focusing on green. The whole world is working green. So, do you see a future for green mobility in Africa, or it's a fancy non-economic concept that could not be tackled at the present time?
Listen, I think what being green is in terms of thinking of definition needs to be adapted to an African context. So what do I mean by that? Is, for example, an investment in a new road in most countries is not necessarily seen as a green investment, right? But if, for example, you make a new flyover, a new road in Lagos, and that saves people from sitting in traffic for hours with their cars, spewing pollution, then you've actually made a green investment. If you make investment in rail so that goods are no longer going over, trucks are no longer going over the roads and blocking traffic, then that in a way is a green investment. So in African markets, you have to think more broadly. I would say in a more traditional sense, as we think of electric vehicles, there's a lot of players who are thinking about the potential for electric vehicles in African markets. Often we think that there are a lot of, we think about countries like Nigeria and Angola who are oil exporters. But even in those countries, they import refined products. And then you have countries like Kenya, et cetera, that is an oil importer. And so therefore, if you could offset that, you not only offset the climate aspect, but you offset an import bill, right? And so if you can charge batteries, solar, some other way, and use those for motorcycles or use those for cars, you not only get the environmental benefit, but you might get a budgetary savings by some of the countries on their import fuel bill. And so you do see a bit of experimentation going on in EVs and in electric motorcycles in particular. But I do think writ large, you have to think differently in African markets when it comes to what's a green investment.
You should be a politician, Aubrey, because the way you just twisted the whole question is perfect, to be honest. But you really give lots of food for thought. It's one issue that we have to carry on working on, defining what is green, how it should be handled, and most important, looking at the green element, reducing traffic jams, reducing shuttling time. All this should be looked at as green, not only that we're talking having electric cars, natural gas cars, and so forth. Naima, we've been talking the whole session about inter-African transport and logistics. What about extra-African transport and logistics? Do we have enough connectivity? If you look at the condensed map of 1 year shipping, passing through the whole world, you'll find that Africa is not calling upon its share. There is limited number of regular shipping lines going to the hub ports in Africa, not to mention the smaller ports. So how do you see what needs to be done? That's number one. Number two, the future.
Number two, sorry?
The future.
The future, yeah. Follow our experience last years, I can say that Africa is well deserved
about logistics.
by sea. We have north calls by sea to Africa. The infrastructures of ports are not able in every country to receive goods. There are big congestions at African ports, that's true. But we can say that we have several calls to all over Africa, about 48 ports are served weekly from or Europe or from any country over the world. And we think that we have to work in improve first the infrastructures of ports in the way to allow more business to come and to allow cargo to be loaded from these ports. So I keep positive, and I think that it's challenging, but it will grow in the right way.
Thank you, Naima. We have only 3 minutes left, so I'll move to Aubrey and ask our politician on the session, what would be your guidelines, your recommendations that we should take back home for African countries, African business, and everybody working in the sector? In 3 minutes.
Well, that's a tall order. And I've never really been accused of being a politician. I tend to stay away from it, so it's an amusing day. You know, I think I guess the main takeaway for me is that there are investment opportunities in the logistics space for almost every type of investor. There's interesting opportunities for the venture investors out there who are looking at these dynamic asset-light platform plays. There are opportunities for private equity players as they look to invest and expand logistics companies. There are opportunities for institutional investors and DFIs in the actual infrastructure that needs to be built. And as Naima gave examples, and there are others like the Arise project in Gabon, there are places and projects that are showing success. And that success trickles over into social and economic good for the country, because you reduce roads and transport allows people to go to work easy, allows them to go to school, allows them to go to a clinic. So really, it's an essential, almost impact-rich investment area. And we don't always talk about logistics and investing in logistics from an impact frame, but it's very true that it has deep impact.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Naima. Thank you, Aubrey, for this wonderful interventions. We have only 40 seconds remaining. So thank you all. Thanks to all our audience. And we look forward to have you all with us next time, physical, in the 3rd Barcelona New Economic Week. And maybe during that event, we'll be having success stories coming from Suez Canal Corridor, Durban, and the list goes on from all around our beautiful Africa. Thank you all, and we look forward to see you again next year. Thank you.
Perfect,
Fantastic.
perfect. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to listen about logistics in Africa. Getting an almost real-time update on what's going to happen is really necessary and interesting. Thank you all for joining us today, and especially you, Dr. Ala Is from Africa. Bien, pues nosotros ya desconectamos este continente. Hemos hablado sobre todo, ¿no?, de estos retos, de la capacidad, el espíritu emprendedor que tiene África, pero sobre todo la necesidad política y económica de que se ponga las pilas y pueda avanzar conjuntamente con la influencia de otros países. Por ejemplo, trataban sobre todo los Estados Unidos. Tiempo para el segundo Inspirational Talks, el último ya del BNEW, de la Barcelona New Economy Week. Llega el momento de hablar de un Be Inspired. Nos lo presenta Pablo Vidarte, él es CEO de BO and Arcane Technologies, y nos hablará de la electricidad en la naturaleza, cómo se fusiona ciudad, campo, todo en uno. BNEW. Vamos a conectar desde los 10 canales y volvemos en 60 minutos desde la antigua fábrica Estrella Damm para tratar el último panel del día, donde fusionaremos también dos elementos, en este caso el trato empresarial desde el sector privado y la influencia económica desde el sector público. Volvemos en breves. Gracias.